Tonight we'll be doing one of the most difficult melachot in Shabbat, called borer. Before we begin with borer, go through one of the easiest ones, one of the smallest ones that we don't encounter too often, but it's one of the 39 melachot, one of the 39 categories that are prohibited in Shabbat. Just a quick introduction, restatement for those who were not here in the very beginning. Melachot does not necessarily mean that something is difficult to do. Some people are under the impression that Shabbat, that which is difficult to do, is prohibited. It's supposed to be a day of rest. It is a day of physical rest. It's also a day for spiritual reflection. And what is really prohibited is a certain type of melacha that was common during the time that we had the tabernacle, the Mishkan. Melachot that had a specific function, an important function that was intended to create, to accomplish something. And it had nothing to do with the difficulty. What they all have in common is that by performing these functions, one tends to forget what Shabbat is all about. So it has nothing to do with the difficulty or the ease of doing something. It's just that when doing these things that are done routinely during the week, doing them on Shabbat would make Shabbat very much similar to the rest of the week. So let's begin with zoreh. Zoreh in English is called winnowing. Winnowing is one of the steps that is necessary after the wheat, the crop, has been harvested. After the harvest, or after the cutting down the wheat, or the barley, whatever it is, we've had the threshing, or separating the kernels from the rest, the hay. We have something called zoreh. Zoreh is to take that mixture. And before zoreh, we had me'amer also, which was to gather everything in one place, to pile it up. Zoreh was a special tool that we used to pick up that mixture after it was broken apart with the threshing, is to pick up that mixture and to scatter it. Because by scattering it, or by throwing it in the air, the wind would come and would remove that which we did not want. What do you call that in English? The shaft, right? The what? And what would remain and what would fall to the ground? The kernels, the shibolim, which is what we want. So there's a big question. If you follow this, if you analyze this melacha, it very much looks like something that we will be talking about soon, called borer. It also looks like other melachot. There's a melacha called meraked. What they all have in common is that we're sifting, or we are separating that which we want from that which we do not want. So there you will find three melachot that may be similar as to what they accomplish. Nevertheless, they are different because they're done differently. Zoreh is done with the wind. Borer is done usually with the hand. It can be done also with a specific tool. And meraked, which we'll see possibly later, has to do with once it's already flour. It's actually sifted further, refining it. So that even though they may be similar, we're separating that which we want from that which we do not want. They're done at different times, at different stages, with different methods to accomplish that. So they're similar, but they're different. How does that apply today at home? It can apply according to some opinions. If one takes his tablecloth, for example, and shakes it out in the wind to make all the dirt on it scatter, that would be a form of zoreh, of removing that which we do not want through the wind. That's a possibility. It's an opinion. Another possibility may be with certain sprays. Even though you're allowed to use a spray on Shabbat, it sprays water and deodorants also. Depending on the type of the spray and what causes the liquid or whatever is in the spray to come out, if it's the pressure inside or if it's something else, it may be prohibited. The normal sprays that we have, that is basically based on pressure that's inside. If you are releasing, by pressing the button, you release the pressure, that raises whatever is at the bottom of the can up through the pipe. Then that's mutar. That's not a problem. Yeah, most sprays may be mutar. There are certain sprays that work a little bit differently. You don't have to be concerned with that. That there may be a question if that's called zoreh or not. Now, of course, if you were to pour water in the wind and wanted that water to scatter, that would be a form of zoreh too. So depending what your ultimate goal is, there can be a question of whether it's zoreh or not. Perhaps the more common one that you may come across with in zoreh is a vaporizer. Now, you know that there's something called a vaporizer and there's something called a humidifier. I think I know the difference. One uses hot water and one uses cold water. Now, with the hot water, of course, you can't add any water on Shabbat because you're boiling it. Like you're cooking the water, it's becoming hot. That's not a question. But with the vaporizer, it's pure cold water. Nothing happens to the water except that it turns into a mist, into a vapor, to humidify, to vaporize the room. It will be permissible to add water. That would not be a form of Zoreh, because it's not happening with the wind, it's happening with a disc that's rotating, it's just splashing. There wouldn't be a problem with that. Okay, I think that's pretty much all that there is with Zoreh. Basically using the wind as a way of scattering, spreading something. And there might be at times something that may come under this category, but not too often. We're going to be spending the rest of the evening on Borer, and that is quite lengthy and very detailed, and there's quite a bit of information in the back that you cannot see here. Okay, what is Borer? It's called sorting in English, and you can also call separating. Anything which involves the separation of two or more types, whether it's food, whether it's gadim, clothing, or whether it's kelim, dishes, cutlery. Whenever we have a mixture, a whole bunch of things of different types, but they're mixed together, the ta'arovet, and you want to take one out of the ta'arovet, out of this mixture, there may be a problem of borer. One, nevertheless, is allowed to use things that are in the mixture, but he needs to know how to do it correctly, how to do it properly according to the halakha, to avoid the problem of borer. Because what one cannot do on Shabbat is begin to sort and arrange things according to size and color, for example. All right, that's what you want to do your wardrobe, right? Do a whole arrangement, sorting, and everything is piled up. It's not that things are already separated and you're just moving things around. That's going to not be such a problem. But when things are piled up and there is a difficulty of removing things, and there is the intent of separating them, then one may run into the problem of borer. So borer does not only involve food, it involves kelim, dishes, cutlery, it involves clothing. You have a whole stack, a whole bunch of clothing that you took out from the laundry before Shabbat and you put it into a whole basket. And now you want to start sorting the socks, the red, the white, blue, the various sizes. That's called borer too. I'm reminding you that this is not easy. Okay, borer is complicated. Some things appear to be borer, other things are not borer. What we're going to go through is the basic halalim, the rules of how to go about eating on Shabbat, avoiding the problem of borer, and what to look out for. The various and the most common problems that surface on Shabbat. Yom Tov, by the way, is not as problematic as Shabbat. Yom Tov is a certain amount of leeway with borer. But on Shabbat, one has to be very careful, because this is one of the melachot, believe it or not, even though it involves just removing things. The basic type of borer involves either removing something that is different, or more commonly known, removing that which you do not want from that which you want. But there can be a borer of removing that which you want from that which you don't want. You notice the difference? There's a big difference. Removing that which you don't want from that which you want. Right? Let me give an example so we can understand this. Let's say you have a bowl of raisins and peanuts. You don't want the raisins, all you want is the peanuts. So you want to remove the raisins from the bowl and just leave the peanuts. That's called borer and that's asur. Under all circumstances. There's no heter. To remove the psolet, to remove that which you do not want from that which you want to remain. So that type of borer, removing that which you do not want from that which you want, in the majority of cases, with a few exceptions, and you'll see why there are exceptions, you cannot do that, no matter how you do it. If you have to, so we'll see what do you mean? Of course you could eat that. And again, I just mentioned the ones that you do not want the raisin. So you say, oh, I don't want raisins, I'm going to take it out of the bowl and just leave the peanut. Right? You can't do that. That's called borer solet mitocha ochel. There's another type of borer of ochel mitocha solet. You want the peanuts, you don't want the raisins. You want to take out the peanuts and leave the raisins alone. That's another type of borer, but that one has ways that one can do so. In other words, there are ways that one can accomplish removing that which he wants and that which he does not want. The one that's the most problematic, the most difficult one, is the one that involves removing that which you do not want whatsoever. That becomes complicated because we will see, well, what do I do with taste? Okay, what do I do with stickers and labels on a challah? I don't want to use the sticker. It says, whatever it says on it, right? How about stems, right? I don't want it, okay? So we have to analyze all these issues, and they're all different, and they're not necessarily called borer, but there are certain conditions on how one can take care of these things. How to go about eating on Shabbat without having the problem of borer. It's possible, but one needs to know the various rules. So remember that borer involves everything, not just food, anything that involves sorting, anything that is part of the mixture that you want to separate for some reason. Therefore, what this means that if the two items are the same, right, similar foods, even though you prefer one over the other, there's no borer here, because you're taking food from food, thing from thing. So that would not be a problem. Neither is borer a problem when you have food items that are not really mixed, but they just are together in the plate. For example, chicken, potatoes, and soup. They're all together, they're not considered mixed. You can take the chicken without taking the rest of it. Right? This is not called borer. They're not really mixed. You have the meatballs in their sauce. Okay? They're not really mixed. They're just found together. You can take the meatballs. That's not a problem. That's not called borer either. And then, of course, we have something called derech achilah, which is very important, that even though you may not want to store it, but you want to eat. You may not want to arrange something, sort things out, but you want to eat. One needs to know how to eat. In other words, it's important that, I guess we're going to get to it soon. It's important to know what one needs to do while he's about to eat in order to avoid borer. Alright, so when we're dealing with ochel mitoch solet, this type of a mixture, you want to eat. You want to take something from a mixture. What's important to keep in mind is that it has to be done in the following way. These are the conditions. It has to be taken by hand, it has to be eaten immediately, and it has to be that you're removing the food from the food that you want to eat and that which you do not want to eat. In other words, let me give you an example. Let's say you have a lot of fruits mixed together, cherries, all sorts of other fruit as well. And what you're interested in eating is only the cherries. And they're all mixed in a big bowl. You can remove the cherries, and what you cannot do is remove that which you do not want. But you can remove the cherries on condition that you do so because you're going to eat them right away. When I say right away, it also means you're going to eat them at the meal, which you're about to prepare. If you're the mother, right, you're setting a table and you're preparing food for the guests that are coming. You don't have to eat it right away. It's mutar to prepare to do this type of borer if it's letzorech achilah, and you're going to be doing it miyad. Miyad meaning immediately, or for the meal that you were setting or preparing the table for like that. Right? And it has to be biyad. Biyad meaning that it cannot be with a specific or a particular keli or tool that is usually that you would ordinarily use during the middle of the week to remove something. In other words, if something can be removed by hand, then of course you can use a knife too, you can use a fork too, whatever is easier for you, because that fork or spoon does not help you any more than your hand. But if something can only be accomplished with a specific kli, which we'll talk about when we talk about melachet, for example, a strainer, right? Let's say you have a ladle or a spatula that has holes. That's one of the items that I speak about later. And you want to use it only because you want to strain the liquid, right? That's a kli which helps in the borer process, and that you cannot use. However, if you have hamin, you have shon, and that's what you ordinarily use to grab the food and place it in another bowl, even though some of the liquid will come out, as long as you put it immediately and you don't wait for the liquid to strain, right? As long as you take it and put it immediately into the pot that you're going to serve with, that's fine. Because it's a form of davar she'eino mitkaven. You don't intend to strain the liquid. You intend to just transfer it over. And a little bit is coming off, that's okay. That's not a problem. But that would be an example of a kli that you cannot use. There's a question with peeling, with a peeler. I'll get to that a little bit later. I'll give you examples of kelim that are specific or do a better job in being mevarer. That we cannot use on Shabbat. But to use our hands to remove something, and what we're doing is removing the ochel mitoch haTorah, the good food that we want from the psolet, and that which we do not want, and we're doing it miyad, that will be permissible. These are the most important conditions that one has to be aware of on Shabbat when analyzing the situation. How do I accomplish this? Now, it becomes a little more complicated, for example, with fish bones. There are situations where these three may not exist, or one of the three may not exist. For example, fish bones, as I said, you're taking out the psolet mitoch haOchel, you're taking the bad from the good. How do we overcome that problem? Okay? So we're going to be talking about that. I don't want to get you too confused. Okay? Or you're eating watermelon, right? You have seeds. What do we do with that? Right? Okay? All these are important conditions, but there are situations that are exceptions because they're different, and you may not have one or the other. But you usually will always have miyad. Miyad is very important. Miyad meaning that you intend to eat it right away. You cannot prepare something in the morning for that later on in the afternoon. You want to take a walk, you want to prepare everything, you take a walk, and later, have the meal. That you cannot do. Another example of borer, which some people may come across with, is you have, let's say, a salad or tuna, and you hate celery, and somebody puts celery. You cannot just start taking out the celery from the tuna. That's typical borer. Typical classic example of borer that you cannot do even with your hand. Forget about these spoons or something. Even if you want to eat it right away, it doesn't matter. Because that's the type of borer called psolet mitoch haOchel. That's what you do not want. That you cannot remove. Unless it's one of those exceptions that we'll talk about. So that's a typical example of borer that one has to be careful on Shabbat he has this mixture. What does he do with it? Right, so what can you do when you have this kind of a situation? Thank you for bringing it up again. What do? You have to do it the other way around. You eat that which you want and leave that which you do not want on the plate. I'm going to take your spoon. Okay, I'm going to take the fish, the regular tuna, and leave the celery alone. That's perfectly fine. As long as, miyad, you're doing it for the meal, you're going to eat it soon, and you don't do it with any special keli. You're doing it with your hand. Now, your hand doesn't mean with your hand, it could be with a spoon too. That spoon doesn't really help you much more than if you were to use your hand, just for hygienic reasons, right? Okay, this is the basic premise of borer. Now we're going to see all the various situations of where this comes up and how to overcome it. Okay, let's say you have a situation where you have a lot of food, and what you want happens to be at the very bottom. Okay, this is called siluk, pushing aside. You're allowed to push away that which is in the way of you getting to what you want at the bottom of the pot. Right? Let's say you have a whole bunch of food, or I don't know, think of a situation where you have something at the very bottom, and the only way to get to it is by removing that which is obstructing you. So you want to move it aside. That's not called borer, even though it appears as you are being mevarer, but the kavanah, the intent, is very important in Shabbat. And we will be learning that one of the rules of Shabbat is melechet machshevet asarat Torah. The Torah prohibited the melacha with the intent that this is what you intend to do. So I gave you an example of melacha she'ena tzricha legufo. It's the opposite example. You're not allowed to dig the ground, it's called choresh, right? But what if you're making a big hole because you want some of the dirt to use to pour somewhere? So you don't want the hole, but you want the dirt. That's called melacha she'ena tzricha legufo. It's still asur, but I'm using it as an example that the Torah prohibited something that you have intention to do this. You have an intention of separating, of sorting. That cannot be done. But sometimes these things happen, nevertheless, and one needs to know how it will be permissible, despite the fact that from this mixture I'm removing one or more items. So siluk is permissible. That is one of the ways of overcoming borer. If something is at the bottom, siluk can work for you, but it doesn't always work. But sometimes it's a possibility. The other one was derech achila, and this is a very important one. That the way you are removing that which you do not want is as you're putting it into your mouth. And this one comes up very often, even though I have some examples down here, I might as well mention. And that is, for example, with watermelon. You cannot just remove the seeds. That's called borer. So how do you do it? Derech achila. Derech achila means you put it into your mouth and you spit out the seeds. Derech achila is permissible. That's not called borer because you're eating it. And as you're eating it, you're taking out the seeds. Well, I know certain cultures have a problem with certain behavior, but it's a culture problem. Yeah, if everybody knows that it's Shabbat and that's the way it's done. That's the way it's done. Now let me give you the best advice. You have this kind of a problem. Prepare everything before Shabbat. Right? Friday afternoon, take off all the seeds. Yeah, right. A lot of these problems can be avoided if somebody prepares before Shabbat. This is only if somebody has to do something or prepare on Shabbat that you may run into this problem. Now, there are certain cantaloupes and melons and certain fruits that you don't have this problem of a watermelon, because watermelon is better. With papaya, with other melons, you can just shake it off. That's not a problem. Or, you can take a piece off with a knife too. So I'm going to get to that. No, that would not be borer. You cut a part of it together with seeds now, right? But to take off something that's embedded or mixed, it's a problem. So the best way to do it is if it's derech achila, as it's already in your mouth, is permissible. Another way of overcoming borer is called pizur, or scattering. Let's say you have a whole bunch of cutlery that's all mixed up, spoons, knives, and you can't, of course, sort them and put them away, each one in its right spot, each one where it belongs. You're allowed to throw it all on a table. And by spreading it out on the table, on the floor, it's no longer mixed. It's no longer considered a mixture, and that would be fine. You can do that with fruits too. Spread them out. Because if something is spread out and you can identify each one, then it's not called a tarot, it's not called a mixture. Borer is only from a mixture. If things are together in one place and you're choosing one over the other. Now, going back to what I said before, things that are of the same type, even though one may be big and one may be small, right? For example, a big piece of meat, a small piece of meat, because it's the same type, there's no borer involved. You can take whichever you want. That's not a problem. What determines type is the flavor, perhaps, and the name.
things are of a different grain, or of a different flavor, then they may be considered tarovet, a mixture, which you may not be able to do borer, unless it falls under the criteria that I mentioned before. You can eat it right away, you can do it with the hand, and it's ochel mitoch absolut, and not psolet mitoch ha'ochel. That which you want to take, you want to have, you take, and not that which you do not want to discard. Where this can come up, with similar types of food, but that are nevertheless slightly different, is if you have a mixture, for some reason, of kosher and non-kosher candy. They're all candy, but one is kosher and one is not kosher. Or you can't make borer of taking out the non-kosher. You can take the kosher candy. You following? So you take that which you want, and you don't take out that which you do not want. But even if you're taking out that which you want, you must remember that that's in condition that you take it out for immediate use, if you want to use it immediately for the meal, and if you don't do it with any special care. Okay, the fourth way to overcome borer problem, nevertheless you have mixtures, and it's very difficult to take out that you want instead of taking out. It would be easier for you to take out that which you do not want. What do? Another way of overcoming this problem is also the solid biyahad. The typical example is a fly falling in your bowl of soup. What do you do now? You can't just take out the fly. That's called borer. That's called borer of the psolet mitoch ha'ochel, taking out that which you do not want, unless you're Chinese and you want to eat it, right? But we don't eat bugs, so what do? You scoop up a little bit of the soup together with the bug. That will be permissible. That's called ochel psolet biyachad. If you are removing good food together with the bad food, that's permissible. That's a way of overcoming this problem of borer. You can't take that which you do not want, so how do I do it? Take a little bit together with what you do want, and that's fine. Which leads us to klipot and madbekot, peels and speakers. Why am I allowed to remove the orange? Isn't that called borer? It is a form of borer, isn't it? You're removing that which you do not want and that which you do want. Right? Right. So, but why is it allowed? The peel is something which I want to discard. And the reason is simple. It's because it's letzorech, or as I mentioned before, derech achilah. I don't mean that derech achilah over here that you're putting into your mouth. I meant the other derech achilah that I wrote before, or letzorech achilah. That is the only way I can eat it, right? The only way that I can get to it is by removing the peel. It's very similar to siluk in a sense. The only way I can get to the orange, since that is the derech achilah of removing a peel prior to eating it, is permissible. So even if it's an apple, which you may be able to eat the peel, it's still permissible to remove the peel. But I'm going to perhaps at this point jump to the last item here, since we're talking about peel, the peeler. Okay, you're removing the peel, but remember we said there's three conditions. Even though here we're missing the condition, here we are removing that which we do not want. It's an exception. Why is it an exception? Because it's letorech achilah. That is the way to get to the food. But what about the other two items? Does that still have to be miyad? What? It still needs to be for the following meal. It still needs to be soon. You cannot start peeling oranges or peeling the eggshells. Eggshell is another example. What do we make on Shabbat? What is it called in English? Egg salad, right? In the morning, right? Prepare it. You go for a long walk. You're preparing it for the afternoon. If you're setting up the table, preparing the meal, and you want it for very soon, then it's fine. But otherwise, you can't just start peeling oranges for later on in the afternoon. You can't do that. So if it's letzorech achilah, if it's miyad, even though we're still missing the condition of ochel mitoch solet, here you have solet mitoch ochel, you're taking out that which you do not want, that's okay, this is the exception because it's letzorech achilah, that's the way it's eaten. But we still have the third condition. How do we remove the peel? Can we use a peeler? So there are quite a few opinions that hold that one should not use a peeler on Shabbat. Because even though a peeler resembles a knife, it does a better job than a knife. Right, a carrot peeler, right? Special peelers that are intended for the vegetables or fruit, because they do a better job at it, so they are specific for that job, you don't use them on Shabbat. You use a knife, you use your hands. So you see, so the other conditions will still apply here, even though this is exceptional as far as the ochel mitoch solet and solet mitoch ochel. You're allowed to discard the peel. Why? Because that's the torah hafilah. That's the only way you can get to the food. That's the way you eat it. And the same applies to madbekot. You have some labels or stickers on the food and the challah. Some say you should cut away a piece of it, but we're not that machmir. We hold it the same like a peel. That anything that's sitting on the food can be removed. Okay, I mentioned briefly before, dvarim lo me'orabim, things that are not mixed together. they're on the same table or the same pot, they're not considered mixed, it's okay to remove one from the other. The best example that I gave you was with the chicken, with the potatoes and the soup. That would be permissible. But what happens if you have the following? You have noodles in soup, and you want to pour out. You want to take out the liquid, or you want to take out the noodles, which is really one of the last points I left with the soup out. But some people, what they would do with the lid, pour the pot, right? Pour the contents out and hold the lid, so the liquid comes out, right? And what remains inside is the noodles. You can't do that. Because, no, you cannot. Because that lid is causing this borer through a form of kli, by holding back the noodles inside and filtering or straining the water out. What you can do, nevertheless, you don't want to have the noodles with the water, with the liquid. You can't pour the whole thing. You can go ahead without the lid. It's permissible to just go ahead and pour. Take it to the sink and start pouring, and what remains inside, that's okay. That is not exactly borer. Well, yeah, you shouldn't. That way, some of the noodles come out, and it's okay. Each time that you're not being real borer. You're holding back that which you want, and that way, without using the lid. Okay, asamot dagim u'basar. This one is a little bit tricky too. Some fish have a lot of bones, and it's dangerous. And chicken has bones, right? There's bones in meat. How do you deal with the bones? You still have the problem of borer. You just simply remove the bones, just like that. Start taking out the bones. That's called borer. And that's borer, the psolet mitocha ofa. You're removing or discarding that which you do not want, and that which you want. And that's a problem. But you don't want to have fish with bones. So what do? I want everybody to think. What does a good Jewish woman do? Exactly. See? Exactly. Gefilte fish. That is what they did. In order to avoid the problem of bones, that's one of the ideas, one of the reasons, you make gefilte fish. No Shabbat, which has no bones. Right. Nevertheless, you still want to have your salmon, you still want to have your trout, and you don't just want to have gefilte fish. You want to have a little bit of everything. So how do you do it? Okay, the way that some people do it, those who are very mahmir, who are very strict, is they treat it exactly as the watermelon seeds. Once they put it into their mouth, then they take out the bones. Everybody agrees that that's okay. Problem is, not everybody wants to do it that way. Or how do you do it with little children if you want to feed them? Now, so there's several other ways to do it. One way is, if it's possible, especially with chicken you can do it, is hold the bones and remove the chicken from it. You're not removing the bone from the chicken, you're removing the chicken from the bone. By holding onto the bone and removing that which you want, that's fine. That works well with chicken. With fish, that's not so easy. To hold the fish and start removing, to hold the bone, what are you going to hold there, right? But with chicken, that works well. There are nevertheless some opinions that hold that you don't have to take out the bones while it's in your mouth. It's sufficient if you're about to put it into your mouth to remove it before you place it. And that is what many people do today that cannot or do not want, have a hard time taking it out from their mouth, is before they put it into their mouth, it's not enough that they're doing it for the coming meal, it's that they're about to put it into their mouth, that has to be, that they remove the bones right before they put it into their mouth. That's okay because that would resemble the other items, pits. Right? Well, with some pits you can easily take them out while they're in your mouth. There's other pits that you may need to, or may be easier to remove before you put it into. So it's permissible. That's not called borer because that is a form of derech achila. You don't have to have the pit, right? So it's okay for you to discard it, but only if it's derech achila and you're about to eat it right away. Yes. Say what? Yeah, what about it? Why? Because they don't know how to do it properly. Obviously, a lot of people do many things. With borer, it's one area in Shabbat that a lot of people do not know how to handle it properly. It's quite complicated. Right. Right, so that's why there are different opinions who hold. Exactly. That's why there are some opinions that hold that derech achila is mutar, but the question is, how lenient do we become with the bones? Because the bones is slightly different than a peel, right? A peel is from the outside. The only way to get to the food is by removing it. And here it's a real mixture. It's a real mixture. The bones are mixed into the meat, into the fish. So what's the best way to handle it so there shouldn't be any borer? So everybody agrees that since it's derech achila, it's much more lenient. And obviously you need to, for your own safety, remove the bones. The question is how best to do it. Some say the only way to do it is while it's in your mouth. Others say not necessarily, because that may be difficult, especially for children, for older people. So as long as you're about to put it into your mouth, as long as you're just about to put it in your mouth, it will be okay to remove the bones from a fish or chicken.
it would be the same. It would be a problem. Right. How most people do it. Isn't that how most people do it? When you eat fish, right? Well, I think most of the time the way I do it is after it's in the mouth, just by habit, not necessarily because that's the halakha. But you are able to, if you need to, remove it before you put it into your mouth. If you see, the problem is you don't always see aldron, and you can't go digging for them. Yeah, sure, that's fine. Yeah, if that's the way you eat your chicken. But Parveen would not agree with the eating chicken, right? Right? It would have to be with a fork and a knife, right? You just go to they'll take care of you. Then you have no problem. Exactly. No problem. Right, exactly. All right. Insects. We spoke about insects in the soup. But what if you have insects on a leaf, on romaine lettuce? Right? So Pesach you eat romaine lettuce and you just notice that there's a bug. Right? No, it's not so simple. Okay, depending on the size of the insect, depending on where it is exactly, you can't just remove the insect. Okay? The best way to deal with insects on leaves of chasa of lettuce is to remove that piece of where the insect is and throw it away. So what are you doing? You're removing ochel in toilet, right? And that's how you're overcoming. That's one of the ways of overcoming the borer problem. That you want to discard something that you don't want, that you do not want. That's always a tool, except for the few exceptions, because you can overcome it through one of these ways. Either it's ochel u'psolo b'yachad, right, or it's derech hafila or whatever. It would be permissible. So that's the best way of dealing with a insect, a bug on the leaf. Now the same would be, by the way, similarly, if you have lettuce that the top leaves are no good, you can remove that aside too, in order to get to the leaves that you do want to eat. That would not be called borer. Even though the next item is a sur. That is rotten food, rotten grapes, cherries. Oh, these are not nice. I can't put that on the table. You start moving, taking out that which is no good. That's typical borer. You can't get more borer than that. No, you can't do that. No. What do? You take out the good from the bad. See, that's the basic way of dealing with borer. You take the good from the bad, not the bad from the good. But even when you take the good, because it's mixed and they're not separate, in a real mixture, you need to do it if you're going to eat it right away. That's the only way you can do it. Right? And doing it with your hand and not with a special thing. Yeah. It's muktzeh. Right. Yeah, you can't kill the insect. That's why we don't wash it. That's why we don't wash it off. It could be alive. You just throw it in the garbage. Yeah, you can't kill the bug. Makes no difference. Right. If it still has a cluster of grapes, or if it's in a bowl, loose grapes, regardless, you cannot. What? Yeah, it's going to be a big job. Yeah, it's going to scatter them. But by the way, if it's a cluster, you can remove the vine. What do you call it? Yeah, I guess we'll talk about it when I speak about stems. You can remove that. But anyway, anything that's rotten, anything that's no good anymore, you can't remove. So if you have something that you don't want, just take that which you want, and you're fine. As long as you eat it right away. As long as they're identifiable, each one is seen by themselves. Yeah, that's okay. Okay, what about the skin of the chicken? Is there another name for it, or is that what they call it? For the skin? There's been different opinions throughout the years of whether it's healthy or not healthy. But here we have another issue, the issue of borer. Can you remove it? No problem. Because according to the halakha, the or of the chicken is considered part of the chicken. It's food and food. It's perfectly fine to remove it. It's not called borer, taking out that which is not good. It's just like food. Ochel mitoch ochel is not a problem. You take one food from another food. That's okay. The problem is psolo. Most of the time. Psolo meaning that which you want is part of it, that which you do not want whatsoever. Here you may want both things. If you want both things, it's not called borer, and take one from the other, even if they're different. You want them both. You want to eat the other one later. That's all. Yeah, but here with the skin, because it's food, because it's part of the chicken, it's not called borer. It's not, even though it's something which you do not want, it's both the same thing. So it's no borer, because the two of the same thing. It looks a little bit different. Yeah. But with shuman, a different story. You have fat. You can't just take a knife and cut away all the fat in the meat. What do? Cut the meat from the fat. Or cut, of course, if you're going to be cutting a piece of meat, but chaval, why waste the meat? So if somehow you can just cut away that which you want, and that which you do not want, you're avoiding the problem of borer. As long as you eat it right away. You can have to get up one morning, Shabbat morning, and just start doing all these borer for late in the afternoon. It's not so much time, it's whatever time is necessary for you. If you're preparing for a meal, you need an hour time to prepare for the meal, so you can't take 2 hours. I'm going to go for a walk now. Right? Whatever, yad is always the amount of time that is necessary for you to do something. In other words, I'm going to be eating it within 5 minutes, so I need to take care of it right now. Yivolim. Molim are the stems. People take and remove the stems of the apple or whatever fruit. It's permissible, even though it's a little bit different than the actual peel. We treat it the same as the peel. We treat it the same in the sense of the seeds, that it doesn't belong there. In other words, we want to get to the food, and this is in the way, and it's permissible. It's okay, perfectly fine to remove the stems. Some are more mahmir, especially with the stems that are deeper, like strawberries. Yeah, but we're not so mahmir. So in the same way you can remove the peels, you can remove the stems. Okay, before we get to the last items, I want to touch briefly on the making of cheese and butter. Even though there are other melachot that cover the making of cheese and the making of butter, which is a very interesting process, by the way, part of the process of making the butter and the cheese can involve borer, because as you know, part of making cheese involves something called, it involves the process of removing the curd, right, from the whey. The whey is the liquid. The curd is the little pieces of cheese that form after you've done something to separate the two. Now, there's various ways of separating. One can be done, it can be done chemically, it can be done with something called rennet in the animal stomach, right? So when you're causing this separation, right, and especially later when you're removing the whey, it's a form of borer. So even though there are other melachot over here, like megaben. Megaben is when you actually form this into a mold, right? After the liquid has been removed, you put it into a form to make the solid block. That's a form of bonel, building. That's called megaben. That's asur for other reasons. But nevertheless, in the process of making cheese or in the process of making butter, where there's also separation, the churning of the buttermilk from the fat. How do you make butter? It's from the cream of the milk, not non-fat milk. Real solid milk has cream. If you leave it, if you let it stay, that's what floats on top. And you take all of that, you churn it, and that's how you separate the buttermilk from the fat, the real fat. And you use the fat to make the butter. So all that separation is a form of borer that you're accomplishing by whatever method you use. There are other melachot involved in making it, but as you can see in the process of making them, you can also run into a problem. All right, last item. Let's say you have some vegetables, some food that are very dirty. Can you wash out the dirt? Isn't that borer? Are you removing the... No problem, right? Because it's similar to what you said before, when everything is a tzorech achilah, anything is derech achilah, tzorech achilah, perfectly fine. You can wash it, but what you cannot do is ladia. What's the difference between mishloch and ladia? Mishloch means, of course, to put it underneath the faucet. And what you cannot do, is put them into a bowl that has a lot of water, and let the dirt on top go down to the bottom. That you cannot do, right? That method of removing the dirt would be asur. So if you just put it underneath the beret, underneath the faucet, to wash off the fruits and vegetables, perfectly fine, no problem whatsoever. But not to the other way, placing it in some big bowl of water where the dirt will come down to the bottom. Right. It's okay to put, you can wash it, in the faucet, no problem. Right. Yeah, the best way is just underneath the faucet. That's the best way to wash it out, not the other way, not using the other way. Obviously, yeah. On Shabbat, you don't want to work hard, right? So whatever you can do before Shabbat, you need to do before Shabbat. There are certain things that you cannot do on Shabbat that we eventually will get with because of tircha yetera. It's too much work. It's called uvda bechol, something which is done during the weekdays. Even though it's not assuming that Torah, it's assuming the Rabbanan because it's just excess. Too much work, and you don't want to have that on Shabbat. So you need to do whatever you can before Shabbat. There's some things that you want it to be fresh, and that's why you leave it to the last minute. And that's what you can't do it before. Okay, I mentioned briefly before a ladle or a spatula. What's the difference? I always get the two mixed up. Which one has the hole? A slotted spoon. Okay. Anyway, the one that has the hole, right? It's used to filter, and you cannot do any filtering on Shabbat. There are, however, ways of filtering that are permissible. When we speak about meraked, I'll mention it. I was going to mention it now, but just too much information. And that involves using teeth. You know how you have sometimes nets or strainers to hold back the leaves? Right? That's a form of straining, and there are some ways that may be permissible. Right? But what you cannot do, that as far as borer is concerned, is let's say you have pulp, right? Pulp, juices, that may be an issue, that may be a problem. You use something to remove. Or let's say you have something floating on top of the yogurt. If you want to remove, you shouldn't remove it with the spoon, you should just pour it out. You know how you have sometimes in yogurt or milk, something floating on top? You don't remove it with a spoon, it's better to just pour it out. So there's various types of straining that are permissible if it's done in a certain way, but usually you have to be careful with that. There's a question, believe it or not, whether you're allowed to use the filter. You have water, filter system. Since most people drink that water even without a filter, then it's okay to use a filter. That's basically it. These are the various examples of borer. There's quite a few more, but we don't have the time to go through them. But this is the basic idea of how this can come up in Shabbat and how to avoid it. There's all sorts of scenarios that you may not think is called borer, but it could be it can be borer if it involves clothing, sorting, or it involves cutlery. You might think borer is only with food, but borer applies to all of these things. Anything that you're removing or sorting or arranging in a particular way can be borer. So one needs to be aware of this, that if you can do it after Shabbat, before Shabbat, he's avoiding a big problem. There's a question, by the way, what happens if somebody did borer? What does he do with the food now? Can he eat the food that he just made borer? What? Yeah. It all depends on the circumstances. If this ever comes up, you can consult with the rabbi if it's permissible or not. It usually may be okay if you do not know what you were doing is wrong. But one has to be careful with it. These things come up every single Shabbat, but it's important to keep in mind that this is a very serious melacha. It's a complex melacha. There are quite a few details, and the only way to know what is right and what is wrong is to become familiar with all the ideas, all these concepts that we can apply them to every single situation as they arise. Okay, that's about it. Next week, with Hashem, we'll be doing some easier melachot, but very, very soon we'll be talking about mevasher. That is one of the most involved bishul cooking. That is one of the most involved melachot of all, because that involves a lot of rabbinic laws and how to warm food on Shabbat that has already been cooked and so forth. And we'll be spending one evening just on that, maybe even two. I don't know. Yes. Yeah.
People say, "Oh, I want the potatoes. I want the kind you have to go and borer the potatoes. Is that a borer? Is that a tur?
No. As long as it's not very mixed. With hamin, it could be a problem because it's very, very mixed. Right?
Oh, no. You see the potato. And
But since it's ochel ve'ochel, and you're going to be eating it right away anyway, it's fine. It's not a problem. As we said before, some things are not considered really mixed, and it's all food. It's okay for you to eat it. נכון, אותו דבר. אז אם זה לא בתוך הרמה, זה סתם כל אחד תלוי. צריך להזיז קצת זה בסדר. אבל אם יש ערימה גדולה, וצריך להוציא ולהזיז, זה יכול להיות בעיה בשבת. למשל אם יש לך מהכניסה, ערימה גדולה של בגדים, אז למיין את זה אסור בשבת. הכל לפני שבת, נכון. Okay, we'll see you next week.